Up to this point, you've learned about permissions or scopes, permission types, and access tokens, but we really haven't seen an example in action. So let's do that. In this exercise, we're going to learn how we can retrieve an access token by using MSAL. This is going to be a vanilla JavaScript app. Nothing fancy, no extra libraries or frameworks other than MSAL and Microsoft Graph. So let's go ahead and get started by visiting the repository where this application lives so you can see how to get it on your machine. So when you go to the Learn exercise, they'll have this link that you can go to clone the repo. Now there's two ways you can get this code on your machine. If you're used to git clone at work, then you can go here and copy it, and I'm going to do that in a moment. If you don't use Git or just don't have it on the machine you're on right now, you can always download the zip and extract it. Either way will work fine. So to get this on my machine, I'm going to go to a command prompt and I'm going to run git clone and then just paste that URL. And then from here, I'm just going to cd into that folder. All right, now while we could work with everything in the console, I'd prefer to use an editor. So I'm going to be using VS Code, but keep in mind you can use any editor out there. All you'd have to do is open this folder and you would be good to go. Now I'm going to use a VS Code syntax here to open it though. Code dot. That'll open this folder in VS Code and then we should be ready to go. And there we have it. So here's our project files. Now this is a very simple project. We have an Index.html, which is going to load 3 custom scripts just using a script tag. Okay, so nothing with packages, no extra dependencies, just script tags in this case. So we have a UI.js. That's going to handle getting a user's profile and then rendering that. We have a Graph.js. That's going to handle making the graph call using an access token and ensuring that the proper scope is defined to be able to read that user profile. And then we have an Auth.js, and you'll see in a moment, this is going to be used to pop up a window where the user can log in. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into Index.html first and just take a quick look at what we have. So ultimately, it's going to render the text welcome and the username. So we're going to use DOM manipulation techniques to actually render the username. And then we're going to have a way for them to click a button to sign in first, and then we'll hide that once they've signed in. But this will do a pop-up, they'd log in with their credentials, and then they'd be good to go. Now moving on down, you'll notice MSAL browser. We're going to be using that for the authentication piece, working with access tokens, things like that. And then we have a Microsoft Graph client. This is a software developer kit or SDK for JavaScript. And that's really all we need for this vanilla JavaScript example. So as you go through the Learn module exercise, it's just going to walk you through these files. And then there's one little task we need to do, which I'm going to do after I finish talking about these files with you. All right, so now that we've looked at that, let's go ahead and move to our Graph.js, because this is ultimately what we're after. I mentioned in the Index.html, it's going to render the display name from the logged in user's profile. Well, to do that, we're going to have a getUser function. It's going to ensure that we have the user.read scope defined so that we can actually make that call to Microsoft Graph with an access token. And then we're going to use this Graph client. Now, if you look right above on line 9, you're going to see Microsoft Graph.client.init with middleware, and we pass it this auth provider. Now, auth provider is a way to get the access token that we need to actually make this call to Microsoft Graph. Notice it has a function called getAccessToken, and that's going to call getToken, which is going to be in the auth file. Now, once we have that token passed in, this Graph client can then be used to make a call to /me. And if you remember earlier, when we used the Microsoft Graph Explorer, /me just gets the user profile for the logged in user. And what we're going to do is say, instead of getting everything for that user from a property standpoint, let's just grab the ID and the display name. That's it. So it's going to be a really small amount of data transferred over the wire. And then we'll make that request async through this get call. You'll notice that this function has an async and then we have a wait. So we're using that standard JavaScript feature. Now that's the graph side, but you'll notice this is super dependent on this code in the auth provider, which is the get access token. So let's move on to the auth.js now. Now, in a moment, I'm going to go back to Azure Active Directory and grab a client ID and a tenant ID and plug those in here. You'll notice a couple placeholders here and here. That's all we're really going to have to do code-wise to get this app going. But let me walk you through some of the highlights of this file. One of the things you saw earlier in Graph.js is ensure scope, user.read. Well, we need to make sure that our access token has that scope defined. So to do that, we're going to check, does the MSAL request currently have whatever the scope name is, user.read in our case? If it doesn't, then we're going to go ahead and push that scope into this array that you see up here. Now, that's important because when we get the token, we're going to use that MSAL request. You'll notice this MSAL request.scopes. That's going to be used as they authenticate, and then once they successfully do that, we can call in to get a token. But this is going to handle, using MSAL, the ability for that user to log in once we've configured some of the Azure Active Directory IDs. Now, aside from that, I want to call out the sign-in function. This is actually what's going to pop up a box that you're going to see for the user. Login pop-up is used with the MSAL client. The user then logs in, and then once we have that, we can get their account's username. We're going to store that temporarily in session storage. Now, the final file to discuss is UI.js. And this is pretty simple. It has a display UI function, and notice that we have a sign-in. That calls the sign-in function that we just looked at in Auth.js. Now, once the user signed in, we then make the graph call. Here's get user from Graph.js. Assuming that works, we're going to go ahead and find a DOM element with an ID of username. If we go back to Index.html, you're going to see that's a span right there. So welcome Dan Wallin, welcome Jane Doe, whatever it may be for the user. And then finally, the code here is going to hide the sign-in button. All right, so that's a walkthrough on the main files that are involved. Now, the thing we're going to have to do, and the exercise steps in the Learn module will tell you this, is we need to go grab that client ID and directory or tenant ID from Azure Active Directory, our app registration we did in an earlier exercise. So let's go ahead and do that. I've already opened that up in the Azure portal. Here's my client ID. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. We'll go ahead and put that right here. All right, let's slide on back over, and I'm going to grab the directory tenant ID. We'll copy that. And that's going to go right here at the end of this URL. And that's all we have to do to get the code in place. Now, the final piece of this exercise is we need to run the app, obviously. Now, remember, we registered in Azure Active Directory a single page application, and we had a redirect URL. You're actually going to see that right here, localhost 8080. Now, if we open up package.json, you're going to notice that we have an npx HTTP server, which uses 8080 in this case. This is a static file server that we're going to retrieve and run locally. Let's do this. We're going to right-click, open in integrated terminal, or you could just open up a terminal window on your machine. And from here, I'm going to run npm start. Now, this is going to ask us if it's okay to get HTTP server on our machine. We'll say yes, and then this should launch it. Now, I'm going to run off to the browser now, and let's go to localhost 8080. And there we go. There's our sign-in button. Now, when I click this, you'll notice a pop-up appears. Now, I've already signed in, really just to speed this up, but normally you'd have to enter one of the user accounts from your developer tenant in Microsoft 365. In this case, I have my fake account here. And then it's going to now say, are you going to give consent to the scope user.read? That's going to allow us to view a user's basic profile. So I'm going to click accept to consent to this permission. And there we go. Notice we have welcome Dan Wallin. Now, if I right click and inspect here, and if we run over to our network, and let's filter this by fetch XHR. This will be our call to the server. So let's go ahead and refresh this. And there we go. You'll notice a token's in here. Here's the call to me right there. There's the actual data that was returned from the server. And then, of course, the UI.js took that display name, found the span in the DOM, and then updated it as you see here. And that's what we have going on in this case. Now, this is, of course, a vanilla JavaScript app. It's about as simple as we could do. You might be using React or Angular or Vue or some other library or framework out there on the front end. The good news is, with Azure Active Directory and MSAL, you can use this anywhere JavaScript runs. So while we have a vanilla JavaScript app here, you could use it in your app that you build at work as well. So kind of keep that in mind. The code may change in some spots, of course, depending on what you're using, but the same exact concepts would apply. So that's a wrap on this exercise. So let's move on to the final summary for this module.